Good evening to both of you, gentlemen. Thanks very much for your time. If I may start with you in Cape Town, Mr. Hlengwa. I mean, not a flattering report you got yesterday from the Auditor-General about the financial state and management of SOEs.
No, indeed, Mr. Mvogo, it is of concern to us. And we obviously now have got our work really stacked up, and it is now incumbent on Parliament to take its rightful place in the course of accountability and oversight and actually deal with these matters. Of course, interacting with the relevant accounting officers and executive authorities to be able to deal really with this issue, because we're dealing with irregular expenditure which has increased year on year. Of course, we are dealing with a lack of consequence management, and one of the key concerns to us as a committee as well is that even where there are clean audits, we are not seeing the impact on the ground really that this financial management is translating to service delivery. So for us, we are interested in also the performance audits, and I'll make one typical example. The Department of Safety and Security here in the province of the Western Cape, for example, received a clean audit. But you look at the issues of crime, particularly here in Cape Town and surrounding townships and communities, and you recognize that there isn't a reconciliation between what is in the books and satisfying yourself that there is a meaningful impact on the ground. So we are wanting to extend really the extent of our oversight and accountability and look at these performances. And as you will recall also with the discussion we had with yourself a few weeks ago insofar as ESCOM was concerned following our oversight visit to Medupi and Gusile, it was on that basis so that we can be able to reconcile what's in the books and what's on the ground. But overall, the challenge which the Auditor-General is throwing our way is well received because we share his sentiments, and we are really going to be expecting government departments and entities to take the necessary action steps for discipline. And this, of course, is including but not limited to a functional, effective and efficient law enforcement agency in the country which is going to be able to deal with this. Of course, some of the matters require internal disciplinary processes, and we are expecting those to happen. But finally, as we move ahead with this issue, is the issue of audit committees, because it cannot be that we are dealing with all these matters at the tail end of the financial year when we as SCOPA receive the reports, because the question becomes what is happening during the year. So the month-on-month and quarter-to reporting becomes of critical importance here. So a collaboration of Parliament and the audit committees, specifically also in Parliament the portfolio committees, becomes important, because prevention is better than cure, and that is the drive which we need to embark upon now, so that the conveyor belt of accountability and oversight must be effective and efficient at every material point throughout the year, so that we as SCOPA as well, when we come in, we then are really dealing with the grave issues. But some of the matters could have been sorted out as they arise during the year, and that relationship between management, audit committees and external auditors, by the way, Mr. Mvogo, because some of the auditors, particularly in municipalities, are not receiving any joy, the extent of intimidation and so on, and auditing must be understood to be an enabler towards good governance and good financial management.
Quite a number of issues you are raising there, and I hope we'll have the time to interrogate them. Let me come back to Johannesburg. Mr. Holeni, I mean, as an observer of this for years, you definitely weren't surprised by what the Auditor-General told Parliament yesterday.
Indeed, the numbers are staggeringly high, and you see the increase as well in terms of irregular expenditure. There's comfort that other line items which are more severe are in fact coming down, such as unauthorized expenditure. But all in all, if you look at the numbers and the way that they've been moving, each year they are moving up and up, and the material loss or opportunity lost for the departments to be able to carry out service delivery or to be able to carry out meaningful projects that will have impact, as was mentioned earlier, is lost annually. And I think for us, what we need to reflect on is, where does it come from? We always talk about the supply chain management side, but supply chain is not the one that spends the money. These are the departments or the various sections that are spending the money. And some of them are spending the money too late, wanting to catch up so that they can be seen to be spending that money and end up committing severe mistakes, as well as putting supply chain management departments under pressure because they are crying out to want to be able to purchase or to buy the services that they need to have in place.
Is it just mistakes, though?
Well, some of it you can say is premeditated because if you don't spend and there is no progressive spending within the year and there's no oversight, or at least a plan that shows the graph moving up so that you are seen to be spending against the budget. We see huge variances at the beginning of the financial years, and as you get to the middle of the year, you may still find that some departments are still under 50% of their expenditure. So some of it you can say is premeditated, because if you create an emergency, you are able to then force the hand, or at least bend some of the rules to be able to go out into the market and procure in whichever way that the direction is. But this shows really a degradation on our side in terms of the discipline of planning. It shows a lack of foresight, and it shows that some of the projects which have been allocated with major budgets have in fact not been conceived fully and have not been finalized so that there's a plan to implement them.
In fact, Mr. Hlengwa, the Auditor-General urged that there be thorough investigations to ensure that there is no malice.
No, it's correct. Then that's the point I'm making. Insofar as law enforcement agencies are concerned, and the internal capacity of government departments and entities to be able to manage consequence management in a manner which is consistent with the law, effective and efficient, so that we desist from having a situation where you've got open-ended disciplinary matters. The second matter, which, and I think what has been raised now, goes to the issue of emergencies. Next week, the SCOPA will be dealing with expansions and deviations which National Treasury will have to explain, because the PFMA and the MFMA and Treasury regulations make provisions in terms of how you go about handling and managing an emergency. And so the abuses which are manifesting in that area as well will have to receive the attention of Parliament, and we are definitely going to be focused on that. So National Treasury will be giving us that particular briefing so that we can deal with those departments and in a pointed way, because what is wrong is for deviations and expansions to actually be entrenched as a norm, because they must be understood to be an exception, because, well, an emergency is exactly that, and there's no department or entity that's going to be operating on the basis of emergencies day in and day out. Thirdly, Mr. Mvogo, the issue which is of critical importance is generally the issue of compliance with the due processes of the law insofar as reporting is concerned. And this, of course, is including but not limited to making your submissions as a government department or an entity to Parliament by the 30th of September. And what we have seen is that there are 49 culprits in this regard. We have received correspondence from some ministers who are explaining that their departments or the entities reporting to them will make submissions by the 31st of October or the 30th of November for a number of reasons which they've explained, and we'll drill into all of those. But where we are concerned is where you've got a perennial headache of people who are just not submitting at all. And the case in point here is SAA. So as a committee, we've taken a decision as well that next week, Wednesday, we'll be interacting and seeking answers and an explanation from the executive authorities and accounting officers insofar as these entities are concerned. So next week, we'll be having SAA, Alexco, NSFAS appearing before us, amongst others. And then, of course, we'll deal systematically with the 49, because what we need to do is tie down on compliance. It can't be negotiable. So as far as we are concerned, this kind of nonsense needs to end here and go no further. So we are taking a tough line, and of course the comments by the Auditor-General should be taken in that vein, that he has recognized the problem, which is draining the fiscus and is aiding and abetting corruption. And so if we do not respond positively to it, then we are not doing justice to the work that the AG has done, and we are literally giving into the hands of those who don't want to comply. And that situation is not sustainable, nor is it viable, and of course inconsistent with our own responsibilities.
Mr. Holeni, I mean, there's a reason for deviations now. Now, you don't want to destroy that because of these culprits who abuse that. What is international best practice? What do other jurisdictions do or put in place to sort of ensure that you don't kill the idea of deviations for the very reasons that it was established, but at the same time you stop the abuse?
I think you have to look at what each one of these departments or each one of the sections are supposed to be delivering. Take utilities, for instance. A power station can blow up any day for whatever reason. So you cannot have a disruption that will last for more than 24 hours. In some cases, we've seen in the likes of the big cities where power stations blow up in winter and there's no electricity. That is something that has to be budgeted for, and is something that can be carried out and you can deviate. Or better still, if you plan ahead, you can have a panel of service providers that you can call on so that they can be able to service that particular emergency. So even those emergencies that are in place, but it cannot be an emergency to go and buy coffee. It cannot be an emergency to go and buy teaspoons, for instance. So we need to be very careful as well to be able to look at what are the items that are tied, for instance, to areas where it would have a major impact on the rest of the population. So if something has been forgotten within the system, so the best practice is exactly that, for emergencies, and there must be true emergencies. And if you look in terms of, the other cases where the sole provider, or at least there's OEMs that are the only ones that supply those items, that becomes a different case, because you can go and test the market, and if there's no one else who supplies that particular specific part or with specifications, that becomes different. So it's always something that must be budgeted for. At least, up to between 5 to 10% of the budget must be able to absorb some of those deviations that are actually going to happen without you planning ahead. So deviations in this case, as we say, with irregular expenses, are not necessary. Not all of them are that bad, because some of the things you truly will not have foreseen that such may happen. But of course, with good planning, which is something that we want to emphasize, and as well as making sure that there's good governance that is followed around making sure that you effect the policies. It's something that we are lamenting currently.
Mr. Hlengwa, I have to ask you this, although we are running out of time. The cooperation of members of the executive, some of them didn't pitch this week.
Well, no, we have dealt with that matter, and as far as we are concerned, as a committee, it's water under the bridge. We have laid into motion a process which seeks to ensure that the meeting that we should have had will be had, and when the executive arrives, they will explain themselves in that regard. What I had really wanted to warn against is that we should not have a public slinging match about this, because that sort of takes away and detracts from the fundamental issue which we should have dealt with when we had our meeting, the issue of Eskom and municipal debt, which is now standing at 25.1 billion rands as at the end of September this year. And so it's important that the interventions that have been put in place are overseen, that we check whether they are functional, so that we can sort it out. But what is very clear is that we have not made headway in reducing municipal debt to Eskom. And of course, we will be interacting with the lead of government business moving forward so that we can synchronize our work and clear these matters. But what we certainly are not going to accept and tolerate is a situation where meetings are not honored. And I think that message has been clearly conveyed to executive, and their cooperation in this regard is going to be of maximum reality. So as far as we are concerned, what happened on Tuesday will not happen again, and we are not going to allow it to happen again.
Thanks very much to both of you for your time. Kulego Hlengwa and Mielani Holini.